The scripture reading for today is taken from Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 36, and 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 through chapter 4, verse 2. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James, and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory, and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. From 2 Corinthians we read, "Since then we have such a hope. We act with great boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. But their minds were hardened. Indeed, to this very day, when they hear the reading of the Old Covenant, that same veil is still there, since only in Christ is it set aside. Indeed, to this very day, when Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. Therefore, since it is by God's mercy that we are engaged in this ministry, we do not lose heart. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. Here ends the reading.
When we enter the world of the Bible, I'm sure that for you, as for me, it sometimes seems very strange and mysterious. And here we are, the day of Transfiguration, and it is very strange indeed. In fact, when we meet people in the Bible, Jesus and Paul, Moses and Elijah, they seem strange. Jesus seems strange. We like to make Jesus over, cosmetically, to be more like us, to be like one of our group. You go around the world and you see many cultures doing that. In our middle-class Western culture, we like things like the Solomon head of Christ. You remember that picture? I've seen it in so many churches. I've even seen that in other countries. And the Solomon head of Christ is, well, it seems like it's a male model for clothing or something. It's just this perfect, bland, non-challenging, comfortable, reassuring picture that Jesus is one of us. But he's not. And Jesus is constantly challenging us. And Jesus does outlandish things. It's no wonder that people were often afraid of him. And And this scene that we have today of transfiguration just makes that even more difficult to understand. Because Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, 3 of his closest inner circle, with him. And at the end of a long, hard day, he does what he so often does, and that is to go off in a quiet place so he can pray and be renewed by God and have a conversation with God and charge his batteries for the next day. He takes Peter and John and James, and they go up this, it's not really a big mountain that they went up, it's a hill, really. And they go up to pray, and then this weird, strange, mysterious thing happens when Jesus is changed and is dazzling white. And then Moses and Elijah come and talk with Jesus. And in the other Gospels that have this story, in Mark and Matthew, it says they were terrified. They fell down on the ground. They were petrified when they saw this. And of course, they were scared. And they didn't even want to talk about it afterward. They just didn't tell people about this experience. They didn't know what to make of it. And it scared them. Now it's very interesting that Luke, who is trying very hard, as he says in the beginning of the Gospel, to give an accurate narrative of Jesus' life and work, has this story bookended by very, very different kind of message. And that's where the spoiler comes from. Because just before, as we see precisely stated in the Gospel, about 8 days before that, we have the scene where Peter confesses, he just blurts out, "Yes, you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus responds to that in a very strange way. He says, "Yes, but I'm going to have to suffer and be betrayed and killed and rise again." Redefining what Messiah means is not what Peter thought it meant, but telling what Messiah is and what Messiah must do. Very dark, negative, but of course hidden in there, though they didn't get it at the time, is the message of reconciliation and resurrection. And then immediately afterward, they come down and they go back to work the next day. And Jesus repeats it, the spoiler alert again. He reveals the ending of the story, right there, in the middle of it, before they even turn and head toward Jerusalem. Because the structure of the Gospel of Luke is that Jesus heads to Jerusalem, and that journey to Jerusalem is very important. Because that journey, like his whole life's journey, takes him to Jerusalem, where he will be crucified and rise. And here we have it. Luke gives the spoiler alerts around the story of the Transfiguration, which is a story of blazing glory. But of course the light and the cloud that took place during the Transfiguration scene, they are both symbols, they are both signs of the very presence of God right there. And of course, God is there and God speaks. "This is my Son, my beloved, my chosen. Listen to him." So what we have here is in kind of a pattern. And I think the message is quite clear. In his life, Jesus is revealing we could say God is revealing through the human life of Jesus many things. But one of them is that there is going to be suffering. That there will be suffering and eventual overcoming and eventual victory. But all along the way, as the Transfiguration shows us, God will be present. God will be right there. God is with us. We are not alone. So you have Jesus revealing two things in these events that we see today. Jesus is revealing the fact that he is going to suffer and that the pattern of life for us too is likely to include suffering, but the light is there and will guide us. We will come through if we allow God to lead us. There's no guarantee that all will come out well during our lifetime or during any particular episode that we go through. But we know that in the end, there will be a final victory. Because this is revealed in these moments when God shows God's presence, God's light, and God's speech guaranteeing his presence with us. You know, that pattern that we see in Jesus' life and in this revelation, we have in our own lives, both collectively and individually. And I have had a couple of experiences that are rather like that helped me, and actually helped us both, Janelle and I, when we were together, to understand better what's going on here. When I first went to Korea in 1953, immediately after the Korean War, and I was by myself, long before I knew Janelle, one of the first things I had to do, about 3 weeks after I arrived, was to help another missionary colleague drive a battered old Jeep that we had, that we'd gotten from the Army, from Seoul down to Busan, where it belonged. It had been used to travel around the country. And it needed to be taken back. And a retired Korean bishop went with us. So the three of us got in this old Jeep at 4:30 one morning and headed off for Busan. That's the length of South Korea, all the way from Seoul, all the way down to the tip of Busan. And we figured that maximum 12 hours, maybe less, we would get there before dark. No way. This was a trip of misfortunes and mishaps, one after another. The first time I got behind the wheel and was driving the car, both back tires blew out at the same time. And we had to figure out how to get, we could put the spare on, but we had to figure out how to get another tire and get it with the tire fixed. Anyway, that was just the beginning. We broke the battery post and we had to get a new battery. Almost impossible to do, but we did. But the thing I want to tell you about is when we got at dusk toward the end of the day, we found ourselves, as luck would have it, way up in the mountains, way up high in the mountains, south of Daegu, about 3/4 of the distance to our destination. Nothing there. It was just wilderness, and there was no place to stay or anything. And suddenly we found ourselves, there was no other way to go. The road was going through a tunnel. Now the tunnel was a tunnel that had been built by the Japanese during colonial days for a railroad. But they had never put the railroad in because of the coming of the war, World War II. So here was this empty tunnel, and we had to go through it. And it was getting dark. We had this clunky old Jeep. Will we make it? How long is it? Where does it come out? What are we doing here? And it was interesting in that tunnel. I'll never forget it. It's a very, very vivid memory. It has become a kind of a symbol in my mind ever since. Tunnels tend to leak a lot of water. And in order to control the water so that it didn't just slosh back and forth, the Army had put little earthen dam-like blocks across about every 10 feet so that there were little lakes, little ponds in between all of this. So we would go up over one and down into the water, and the water was just deep enough that it came into the Jeep. Jeeps of that vintage had scuppers. They had holes so that the water would run out. And it was running in. And of course our feet got wet. We would go over one after another days. It seemed endless. That tunnel went on and on and on and on. Finally, we didn't make it out. The Jeep did make it through the tunnel. And when we came out and emerged at the other end of the tunnel, there was gunfire. There was a firefight going on between the Korean Army and a band of communist guerrillas from the north who were still there, left over after the Korean War. So we drove right into a battle. So of course we backed up, back in the tunnel, and we waited for the battle to end, which it did after a while. Then we had to sit there the rest of the night, taking turns, sleeping as best we could. And then when dawn came, what did we find? Immediately at the entrance of the tunnel, just a few feet ahead, was a bridge, a railroad bridge. And they had put the railroad bridge in, and they had put the rails on the bridge, but the bridge was only this wide, with rails, like railroad bridges on. We had to drive the Jeep across that. Well, suffice it to say, that tunnel became for me a kind of a symbol. Every time, I would get into a difficult situation where I just didn't know where the end, we thought about that tunnel. Because it was a trial, it was a tribulation, and there had to be something to keep us going, to get us through. And that's what the Transfiguration gives us. And God is with us if we will trust and follow. The chances are God will see us through. And we'll come out on the other end of that tunnel. There was another experience, I may have told you about this before, after Janelle and I were married, that I think about because it's relevant to this story today. We were married later, in '59, and almost as an extension of our honeymoon, we went to Korea for our first term of missionary service together. And we went by ship from San Francisco. And in those days, they sent us on freighters because we could take all our worldly goods with us and it would be on our ticket. Saved a lot of money. It took 3 weeks. We left from San Francisco on this freighter. Halfway across the North Pacific Ocean, our ship received a mistaken weather forecast. And instead of going around a typhoon, we ended up going straight through the middle of the typhoon, the big one. Its name was Typhoon Dinah. Don't soon forget that. And for hour after hour after hour, we plowed through that typhoon. It was quite an experience. It was a big ship. I think those cargo ships were called C3s. And it was a big, long ship. And we would go down the length of a wave. whole ship would be on the backside of the wave and then turn and go up. The wave was more than the length of the ship before we got to the top. The captain told us he had to maintain an 89-degree angle to the wave in order to get through the storm. And interestingly enough, this is really part of what interests me most about it. At no point in that experience did Janelle or I feel afraid. Somehow, God stayed with us, close to us, and delivered us from the fear that you would automatically think we would have. Now, the captain, he was afraid. And after the storm was over and we sat and talked with him, he said, I was very worried about my engines, because if the engines had not held and kept that 89-degree angle, we would have turned, wallowed, filled with water, and sunk. We came very close to doing it, but we didn't. We came through. And again, that was not an experience where we were overcome with fear, or could have been. But in subsequent years, we did have any number of experiences where we were scared, where it was very difficult to get through. And we had to depend on that transforming light, that presence of God, to strengthen us and pull us through. And somehow it did. You've had experiences like that too, I am sure. And many in our family and among our friends have too. These experiences come. You know, Buddhism teaches that suffering is the essence of life. Suffering is the essence of human life, and what we need to do is learn to rise above it. But we don't rise above it. In the Christian perspective, we go through it. And we are, hopefully, if we are fortunate, we come through stronger and wiser. Not necessarily, but hopefully. And even if the result of our period of pain and suffering and fear and terror does not issue in some immediate glorious resolution, we know that in the end, in the final end, there is a guarantee, and the guarantee comes right here in that transfiguration when God is there and speaks and is present. So we know that ultimately, after the resurrection, will come the glory. Right now, United Methodism is in the midst of a long-standing struggle. And the General Conference special session just ended with that struggle not being resolved. But, like so many other things, that is a long, difficult struggle, and we have a right to be fearful, but we also can trust that the God of the Transfiguration will see us through. We can give our unconditional trust to our God of unconditional love. So, as we think about Jesus' life, as we think about a Jesus who doesn't always conform to our expectations, but who brings us a message that God is here with us and will see us through, Let us move forward, not only in our lives, but move forward as a church and as a denomination, trusting that God's love will sustain us.